Sometimes, grammatical theories can make you feel like you are solving algebra in disguise. But when it comes to dependency grammar, it is very easy. What is dependency grammar? This refers to the syntagmatic relations and analysis that focuses on syntagmatic relations. For example, if you have this sentence, the class appointed Kwame the class prefect, if you analyze this sentence by looking at the syntagmatic relations between the words, then you are doing dependency grammar. So any analysis that focuses on the syntagmatic relations between words is what is referred to as dependency grammar. But wait, do you understand syntagmatic relations? Let us explain it. We have two major relations in syntax. One is paradigmatic relation, and the other is syntagmatic relation. What is paradigmatic relation? This is the relation holding among elements which can be substituted for each other. Let us have this example. What you see here is a formula for a noun phrase. Now, let us establish the paradigmatic relationship between the words. We have our article a and we have the noun bag. But green over here is serving as an adjective, meaning it is modifying the noun. We can replace green with other words that can fit into that category. So instead of saying a green bag, equally you can say a beautiful bag, a cheap bag, a yellow bag. So green, beautiful, cheap and yellow are in a paradigmatic relation. It means that each of them can be substituted for the other in this context. That is the meaning of paradigmatic relations. The relation holding among elements which can be substituted for each other. When we take this sentence, can you discuss the paradigmatic relation? Let's take the noun class. Which other words can replace class in this sentence? The class appointed Kwame the class prefect. You can say the men appointed Kwame the class prefect. The women appointed Kwame the class prefect. The boys appointed Kwame the class prefect. Many other words can fit into the position of class. It means that they are of the same word class and they can replace each other. This means that they are in a paradigmatic relation. That is the meaning of paradigmatic relation. The relation holding between words that can be substituted for each other in a phrase or a sentence. If you do this kind of analysis, it is not dependency grammar. Remember that dependency grammar focuses on syntagmatic relations and not paradigmatic relations. How then do we do dependency grammar analysis for this particular sentence? If paradigmatic relation is not considered in dependency grammar, then what are syntagmatic relations? Syntagmatic relation is a lateral relation between one word and the one next to it. For example, the relationship between the determiner, which is the article the, and class is that of syntagmatic relation and not paradigmatic relation. The relationship between the verb, which is appointed, and then the subject, which is the class, is that of syntagmatic relation because it is the relation between one word and the one next to it, and not the words that can replace the word in the sentence. There is also a syntagmatic relation between appointed, which is our verb, and then our object, which is Kwame. Again, there is a syntagmatic relation between Kwame and then the noun phrase after it. That is the meaning of syntagmatic relations. It is the lateral relation between one word and the one next to it. But the relation holding between words that can be substituted for each other is what we call paradigmatic relation. That is all that dependency grammar is about. We are establishing syntagmatic relationship between words. Therefore, instead of looking at sentences or elements based on paradigmatic relation, we shall talk about the relationship of syntagmatics. What are some examples of syntagmatic relations? Syntagmatic relations can be the relation between the article and the noun, the subject and the verb and the direct object, a possessor noun phrase, and then the possessed noun. All these are examples of syntagmatic relations. So when you are looking at the relationship between the and then class, you are doing dependency grammar because it is a syntagmatic relation. If you are looking at the relationship between the class and then appointed, which is the verb, you are doing dependency grammar because there is a syntagmatic relation between the verb and then the subject. This is what we call dependency grammar. So functional categories such as the subject, the object, complement, apposition, modifier, head, qualifier are all examples of syntagmatic relations. That is the difference between the two major relations in syntax. When we talk of the dependency grammar, then we are referring to the syntagmatic relations between the elements in the sentence. In order to understand the intricacies involving dependency grammar, let us look at syntactic dependency. What are syntactic dependencies? Phrases in English are made up of heads and dependents. Do you know heads? And what about dependents? When we say a head, the head is the main or core element. It means that without the head, the other elements cannot exist. What about the dependents? In a phrase, other elements that depend on the head are called the dependents. So let us give some examples of heads and then dependents. First, we shall look at the prepositional phrase. In every prepositional phrase, there is going to be a head that is the preposition, and then the noun phrase, which is the object of the preposition. So over here, there is a head and a dependent relationship. The head is the preposition, and then the object of the preposition, which is the noun phrase, the chair, becomes the dependent. That is an example of a head and then a dependent in a prepositional phrase. Let us take the noun phrase. In this noun phrase, the handsome man in my hometown, which of the words is the head? Obviously, it is man, because all the other elements will depend on the man. However, the man can exist without the other elements. This means that the man is the head. There is a dependent. Handsome is also a dependent. Over here, the prepositional phrase is a dependent because it is just giving us more information about the head. Therefore, in a noun phrase, the noun is the head. What about the adjective phrase? Let's look at this example. Extremely beautiful indeed. Which one is the head? Obviously, it is the adjective because it can occur without the head. For example, she is extremely beautiful indeed. You cannot say she is extremely indeed, or she is indeed, or she is extremely. You must bring the head, but the head can occur without the other elements. It means that the other elements are dependents. But since this can occur alone, as in she is beautiful, it is the head of the adjective phrase. So the head of an adjective phrase is an adjective. What about the adverb phrase? Extremely carefully indeed. Over here, carefully is the head because the other adverbs are also dependent on carefully. They cannot exist in a sentence without the adverb carefully. In an adverb phrase, the adverb is the head and then the dependents are the other adverbs that give more information. Apart from phrases, clauses also have their heads. When you have a sentence or a clause, what is the head of the clause? The head is the verb. Why are we saying that the verb is the head of a clause? This is because the verb determines the element that should be included in the sentence. For example, wrote over here can be done by only human beings. Therefore, the subject cannot be an inanimate object. You can say, the tree wrote John a letter yesterday. It is incorrect. This means that in a sentence or in a clause, the verb is the most obligatory element that selects the other elements in the sentence. In a nutshell, in a clause, the verb will be the head. Over here, the subject becomes a dependent of the verb. The indirect object, which is John, becomes a dependent of the verb. A letter, which is the direct object, becomes a dependent of the verb. Yesterday, which is a noun of time, is also dependent on the head. So the verb here is the overall boss in a clause. Every other element that depends on the verb is called an argument. In a clause, arguments are the dependents of the verb. Any other element that depends on the verb, which is the head, becomes a dependent. They are called arguments in a clause. Let us discuss how verbs, which are the heads of a clause, restrict the other elements. As we've already mentioned, in a clause, arguments are the dependents of the verb. In this sentence, the secretary wrote John a letter yesterday. Which one is the head of the clause? Obviously, it is the verb because it selects the other elements. The verb here imposes requirements on the other elements. For example, as mentioned, wrote demands an animate subject. The thing that is being written must be inanimate, and then the one that is receiving the inanimate written object should be an animate noun. This means that the verb over here has placed restrictions on the other elements that should occur in the sentence. In grammar, when the verb restricts the occurrence of other elements in the sentence, then we call it selectional restriction. So the requirements imposed by the verb on the arguments is what is called the selectional restriction. Let us look at the various ways that elements are restricted by the verb. For instance, verbs like laugh, talk, read, write, think require animate subjects. This means that when you use these verbs, there must be a noun that is an animate noun. You cannot use inanimate subjects. For example, she laughed loudly is correct, but it would be wrong if you say the chair laughed loudly. This is because laugh over here is placing restrictions on what should occur in the subject position. This is an example of selectional restriction by the verb, which is the head of the clause. In another sentence, the teacher advised the student yesterday. Advised over here can only be performed by an animate subject. Therefore, the teacher can advise another animate noun. In this case, the sentence is correct. But if we say, the stone advised the chair tomorrow, it is wrong. This is because advised is placing restrictions on what should occur as the subject and what should occur as the object. So this is also an example of selectional restriction by the verb. The verb is restricting which elements should occur or appear in the sentence. Now that we have established syntactic dependencies in English in grammar, let us talk about the types of dependencies in English grammar. The first type of dependencies is the bilateral dependency. In bilateral dependency, the occurrence of each element is dependent upon the occurrence of the other. It means two elements must occur. One element cannot occur without the other element. That is what we mean by bilateral dependency. Both elements must occur in order to complete their meaning. To explain further, we can say that the head cannot occur without the dependent, and the dependent cannot occur without the head. Both elements should appear in the sentence. Let us look at some examples of bilateral dependencies. The first example of bilateral dependency is the relation between the subject and the verb. Both of them must occur together. One cannot occur without the other. For example, the girl wrote John a letter in the room. The girl and wrote are in a bilateral dependency relation. This is because you cannot say wrote John a letter in the room. It will need a subject. And you can say the girl John a letter in the room. It will need a verb. This means both elements must occur together. One cannot occur without the other. There is a bilateral dependency relationship between the subject and the verb. So whenever you have a sentence, the relation holding between the subject and the verb is that of bilateral dependency relation. Let us look at another example of bilateral relationship. That is the relation between the preposition and the prepositional object. For example, the girl wrote John a letter in the room. We already know that the subject and the verb are in a bilateral relation, but the preposition and its object is also in a bilateral relationship. For example, you cannot say the girl wrote John a letter in, and at the same time, you can say the girl wrote John a letter the room. This means that in and also the room must occur together. One cannot come without the other. Whenever you have a prepositional phrase in a sentence, the relationship that exists between the preposition and that of the prepositional object is a bilateral relation. Now, the next example of bilateral dependency is the relation between the verb and the direct object. We already know about the subject and the verb, but if you have a transitive verb, then it means that the relationship between the verb and that object is going to be that of bilateral. This is because both of them must occur in order to make meaning. For example, the girl wrote John a letter in the room, and you cannot say the girl John a letter in the room. There must be the occurrence of the verb and then the direct object, which is a letter. Both of them must occur in order to make meaning. So the relationship between the verb and the direct object is that of bilateral relationship. The next example of a bilateral dependency relationship is that of the verb and then the indirect object. You must note that for the verb, its subject, its direct object and indirect object are all in a bilateral relationship with the verb. The verb is the head of a clause. The subject is in a bilateral relationship with the verb. The objects are also in bilateral relationships with the verb. So these are the bilateral dependencies that exist in English grammar. Now let us learn how to represent bilateral dependencies in English. First of all, it was used in Hodgson's 1982 word grammar and also expatiated in Van Valen's 2001 Introduction to Syntax. When you want to show bilateral dependencies in English, then you are going to use a curved arrow with double arrow tips. So this is the symbol that we use to express bilateral dependencies. So you find the head and the dependent will have the arrow tips. If the dependent comes before the head, then the arrow is going to be reversed. So for example, if you are showing bilateral relations, then when you have the verb, the arrow is going to move from the verb to the subject because the subject and the verb are both in a bilateral relationship. If you want to show the bilateral relation between the verb and the direct object, the arrow will move towards the direct object because the verb is the head. If you want to show the bilateral relation between the verb and the indirect object, the arrow will move from the verb towards the indirect object. Now, when it comes to prepositional phrases, the arrow is going to move from the preposition towards the prepositional object. Take note of the symbol For bilateral relationships, we use a curved line with two arrow tips. Now let us learn how to use the symbols to show the bilateral relationships between the words in a sentence. This is our first sentence. The girl wrote John a letter in the room. Now, which elements here are in a bilateral relationship? The verb is wrote. We know that the verb and the subject are always in a bilateral relationship. Therefore, the arrow will move from the verb, that is wrote, to the girl, which is the subject. We are done with the subject and the verb. Which other bilateral relationship exists in this sentence? Remember that whenever we have a transitive verb, the relationship between the verb and the objects are also bilateral. What is the direct object in this sentence? It is a letter. So there is a bilateral relation between the verb and then a letter. The arrow will move from wrote to a letter to show the bilateral relationship between them. Remember that the indirect object is also in a bilateral relation with the verb. Therefore, the arrow will move from the verb, which is the head, towards the indirect object, which is John. So we would have this. Now, we have established three bilateral relations in the sentence. The first one was the relation between the subject and the verb. The verb was the head. That is why the arrow moved from the head towards the girl. Also, we have established the bilateral relation between the verb and then the direct object, that is a letter. And there is also a bilateral relation between wrote and then John, which is the indirect object. But there is still one bilateral relation that should be shown. That is the relationship between a preposition and then the prepositional object. We have a prepositional phrase. So to show bilateral relationship between in, which is the head of the prepositional phrase, and then the room, which is the object of the prepositional phrase, our arrow is going to move from in towards the room, like this. Now we are done showing all the bilateral relations in this particular sentence. Very easy. If you want to identify bilateral relationship, check for the relation between the verb and the subject. If there are objects, then they are also in bilateral relationship with the verb. If there is a prepositional phrase, there is a bilateral relationship between the preposition and also the prepositional object. This is how to show bilateral relationships in clauses. Let us try with this sentence. Can you identify all the bilateral relationship? First of all, find your verb, which is won. So who won a medal? There is a bilateral relationship between won and the subject. And what is our subject? The subject is the student in my school. Therefore, you will move the arrow from won towards the subject, which is the student in my school. We have shown the first bilateral relation. Now, what is the other bilateral relation in this sentence? The student in my school obviously won something. Therefore, there is a bilateral relation between the verb won and then the direct object, which is a medal. Now, we have shown the bilateral relationship between the subject and the verb, and also the verb and the direct object. Which other bilateral relation exists in this sentence? Remember, there is a prepositional phrase. So we have to show a bilateral relation between the preposition and then the prepositional object. So the arrow will move from the preposition towards the prepositional object. Now we are done with all the bilateral relations in this sentence. Representing bilateral dependency is not difficult. Just look for your verb. The subject and the verb are in a bilateral relation. If there is an object, the verb and the object will be in a bilateral relation, whether it is a direct object or an indirect object. If you have a prepositional phrase, then the preposition and the prepositional object is also going to be in a bilateral relationship. The next type of dependency relation is the unilateral dependency or simple dependency. We have learned that in bilateral dependency, the head and the dependent must occur. For example, the subject must occur and the verb must also occur. Unilateral dependency is the exact opposite of bilateral dependency. In unilateral dependency, the head can occur without any dependence. It means that the dependents are optional. In other words, we can say that the dependents require the head for their occurrence. So without the head, the dependence cannot occur. But the head can occur without any dependence. So there is no restriction placed on the head. Let us use this example to explain further. The very tall women like basketball a lot. If we were asked to establish the bilateral relations, we will just identify our verb, which is like. The verb and the subject, the very tall women, are in a bilateral relationship because one cannot occur without the other. In the same way, basketball, which is the object, cannot occur without the verb. Both of them must occur in order to make sense. So you can say the very tall women like a lot, and you can say the very tall women basketball a lot. Both of them must occur. That is bilateral dependency. But if we talk about unilateral dependency, it means the head can occur without the dependent. We can see this in the noun phrase over here, the very tall women. Which of the elements in the noun phrase can occur without any dependent? It is the head, which is women. It can occur without all these. So you can say women like basketball a lot. This means that the, very, and tall depend on women, but women can occur alone without these dependents. That is an example of unilateral dependence. There is a unilateral dependence between the, which is the article, and women. Women can occur without the definite article. You can say very tall women like basketball a lot. Also, there is a unilateral relationship between the adjective phrase over here and then the noun, which is the head. Women can occur without very tall. You can say that the women like basketball a lot. This means that women, which is the head, is in a unilateral relation with the dependents. When we take the adjective phrase alone, we can also see a unilateral dependence between very and tall. In the adjective phrase, tall is the head, which means that the dependent, which is very, is optional. You can say the tall women like basketball a lot. So very and tall are in a unilateral relation. There is also a unilateral relation between the verb over here and a lot. A lot is giving us more information about the verb in terms of degree, but the verb, which is the head of the clause, can occur without a lot. You can say the very tall women like basketball. There is no need to bring a lot. This means that a lot here is in a unilateral relation with the verb like. Like, which is the head of the clause, can occur without a lot. This is the meaning of unilateral dependence, the exact opposite of bilateral dependency. How do you tell if this element and another element is in a unilateral relationship? Examples are the noun phrase. Whenever you have a sentence to identify unilateral dependency, search for noun phrases. All the modifiers in a noun phrase are in a unilateral relation with the noun, which is the head. For example, if you have just an article and a noun, there is a unilateral relation between the article and the noun. The noun can occur without the article because it is the head. If you have an article, an adjective, and a noun in a noun phrase, books can occur without the green. For example, you can say books are very valuable. Since the noun head can occur without the dependence, any modifier will be in a unilateral relation with the noun. So there is in a unilateral relation with books. Green is also in unilateral relation with books. When you have an article, an adjective, the noun head, and a qualifier, the qualifier will also be in a unilateral relation with the noun head. This is because the noun head can occur without the qualifier. For example, the green books in my room. We know that there is in a unilateral relation with books. and at the same time, green is also in a unilateral relation with books. In my room is also in a unilateral relation with books, because books, which is the head, can occur without this. So you can say the green books are mine. Equally, you can say the green books in my room are mine. This means that in my room is just providing optional information about books. It is in a unilateral relation. The head can occur without the qualifier. In an adjective phrase, the adverb is always in a unilateral relation with the adjective head, as in very tall. There is a unilateral relation between very and tall. In a clause, whenever we have optional adverbials, they are in a unilateral relation with the verb, which is the head of the clause. For example, he won the match in the evening. You can say he won the match without bringing in the evening. This means that in the evening is just providing additional information about one. One can occur without in the evening, but in the evening cannot occur without one. That is the meaning of a unilateral relationship. The head can occur without any dependence, but the dependence will need the head in order to occur. For example, you can say he the match in the evening. The occurrence of in the evening will depend on the occurrence of one. But when one is written, you can omit in the evening. That is unilateral dependency. Let us use diagrams to establish the unilateral relations between words in a sentence. Unlike bilateral relations where we used a curved line and double arrow heads, in a unilateral dependency, you are going to use just a curved line and a single arrow head. This is the symbol for unilateral dependency. And make sure that the arrow moves from the head towards the dependent. Keep in mind the elements that are in a unilateral relation within the sentence. In a noun phrase, the modifiers are in a unilateral relation with the head. The qualifier in a noun phrase is also in a unilateral relation with the head. In an adjective phrase, the adverb is in a unilateral relation with the head, which is the adjective. In a clause, the verb is in a unilateral relation with the adverbials. Let us have these examples. In the first one, the girl wrote John a letter in the room. We see that in a noun phrase, all modifiers and qualifiers are in a unilateral relation. So let us identify the noun phrases and then establish our unilateral dependencies. First of all, the and girl are in a unilateral dependence. Girl is the head, so the arrow moves from girl towards the, which is the dependent. Which other noun phrase do you see? We see a letter. Letter is in a unilateral relation with the article, which is a. Which other noun phrase exists in the sentence? We see the room. Room is in a unilateral relation with the. Now we have established all the unilateral relations in the noun phrases. But don't we have a verb and an optional adverbial? Of course. In a clause, the verb and the adverbial are always in a unilateral dependence. Therefore, wrote is in a unilateral relation with in the room. It means wrote can occur without in the room. We draw the arrow from wrote towards in the room, which is the optional adverbial. Now we have established all the unilateral dependencies in this sentence. Let us move on to the second sentence. Let us identify all our noun phrases. Every modifier or qualifier in the noun phrase is in a unilateral relation with the head. We have this noun phrase, the student in my school, and we have another one, a gold medal. Let us identify all the unilateral relations. First of all, there is a unilateral relation between the article and the noun head. We draw the arrow from the head towards the dependent. Again, in the prepositional phrase, we have my school. There is a unilateral relation between school and then mine. So we draw the arrow from school towards mine. Also, when it comes to this noun phrase, a gold medal, we have a unilateral relation between a, which is the article, and the noun head, which is medal. So we draw the arrow from medal towards a. There is also a unilateral relation between the adjective and medal. So we draw the arrow from medal, which is the noun head, towards the adjective, which is gold. Now the last unilateral relation that exists is in this particular noun phrase, the student in my school. Here we can see that the prepositional phrase in my school is a qualifier in the noun phrase. Therefore, it is in a unilateral relation with the student. So we draw the arrow from the student towards in my school to show the unilateral relations. Identify all your noun phrases and then establish the unilateral dependencies. We have the boy and also the fish. There is a unilateral relation between the boy, which is the head, and the, which is the article. When it comes to the fish, there is a unilateral relation between fish and then the, which is also an article. We are done with all the unilateral relations in the 3 sentences. Very easy. Now let's talk about the last dependency relation, that is the coordinate dependency. Now for bilateral, we said the elements must co-occur. For unilateral, the head can occur without dependence. But for coordinate dependency, this is the relation holding between conjoints that are of equal ranking or grammatical status. So immediately you spot a coordinator joining elements, then there is a coordinate dependency between the elements that are conjoined. For example, the manager and the subordinates made a decision. Which elements are conjoined? We have the manager, which is a noun phrase, and it has been joined together by a coordinator to the subordinates. The tall and lanky man was given a prize. Here we have conjoined adjectives. They are of the same grammatical status. Tall and lanky are joined. There is a coordinate dependency between tall and lanky. He ate and danced at the party. What are the coordinate elements? They are ate, which is a verb, and then danced, which is also a verb. We have conjoined verbs. She walked slowly and carefully towards the park. We have conjoined adverbs in this sentence. How do we represent conjoined dependency or coordinate dependency? If you are given this sentence, the elements that are conjoined will be represented using just a curved line like this. So if you do this, it means that ate and danced are in a coordinate relationship because both words are of equal ranking or grammatical status. Both are verbs. In sentence 2, the manager and the subordinates made a decision. What are the conjoined elements? We have the manager, a noun phrase, and we have the subordinates, a noun phrase. So to show coordinate relation, we will draw a curved line from the manager to the subordinates, or from the subordinates towards the manager, because both of them are of equal rank. Let us talk about sentence 3 and 4. The tall and lanky man was given a prize. What are the conjoined elements? Here we have tall and lanky. We draw a curved line from tall towards lanky, or from lanky towards tall, because both of them are adjective phrases and they are of equal rank. For number 4, she walked slowly and carefully towards the park. We have conjoined adverbs. This means that they are of equal rank and then they are in a coordinate dependency relation. We draw a curved line to show this relationship. This is how to represent conjoined dependency. Now that we know all the 3 dependencies in grammar, that is the bilateral, the unilateral, and the coordinate dependency, let us look at how to include all of these dependencies and represent them in a sentence. Here is the summary of what we have discussed so far. When we talk about bilateral relation, then it is the relation existing between head and the dependent, and both the head and the dependent must occur together. One cannot occur without the other. For example, the relation between the subject and the verb is that of a bilateral relation. What about unilateral? Here, the head can occur without the dependent. So the brackets or the parenthesis here is showing an optional occurrence, which means the head can occur without the dependent in a unilateral relation. But for coordinate relations, both are heads because they are conjoined elements of the same rank. In a nutshell, for bilateral dependencies, the relation between the subject and the verb and the direct object, the verb and the indirect object, the preposition and the prepositional object are all bilateral relations. To represent bilateral relationship, we use double arrow tips to do so. For example, the student in my school won a medal. So one is in a bilateral relation with the subject and also in a bilateral relation with the object. Also, the preposition is in a bilateral relation with the prepositional object. What about the unilateral dependencies? This is simply the relations between the modifiers and the heads. So for example, when you take a noun phrase, the head noun is in a unilateral relation with the, which is the dependent. My school is in a unilateral relation with my, which is the dependent. A gold medal is in a unilateral relation with a, and also in a unilateral relation with gold. Also, the student is in a unilateral relation with in my school, which is a qualifier. What about coordinate dependency? That is the relation holding between elements that are of equal rank and are conjoined. For example, he ate and danced at a party. Ate and danced are in a coordinate dependency relation. Now that we understand the dependency relations, let us solve some examples. Always read instructions for any test that you take. So using the arrows method, which means we are going to use the dependency grammar method. Using the arrows method, indicate the bilateral, unilateral, and coordinate relations in the following. Now this is our first sentence. The man and his wife sang and danced in the church. First of all, we are going to draw our arrows for all the unilateral relations in this sentence. So let us find the phrases and their modifiers so that we can draw unilateral relations using our arrows. So what unilateral relation do you see in the sentence? Identify all the noun phrases. First, we have the man, we have his wife, and the church. So let us draw the unilateral relations between them. There is a unilateral dependency between the, which is the determiner, and then man, which is the head. So we draw our arrow from the head, which is the noun, towards the determiner, the. We are done with the first unilateral relation. What are the other noun phrases? We have his wife and the church. Let us finish with the church. We draw the arrow from church towards the to show the unilateral relations. What is the last noun phrase in this sentence? We have his wife. Wife is the head. Therefore, we draw our arrow from the head, wife, towards his to show the unilateral relations. Sang and danced can occur without this prepositional phrase. For example, the man and his wife sang and danced. Since sang and danced is the head of the clause and in the church is just a dependent of sang and danced, there is a unilateral relation between sang and danced and the prepositional phrase. So we will express this relation using our arrow from sang and danced towards the prepositional phrase, which is in the church. Let us establish the coordinate relations. First of all, what are the conjoined elements? We have the man, which is joined together by and to his wife. The man and his wife are conjoined elements. We also have another conjoined element, sang and danced. To show conjoined relationship or coordinate relationship, we draw our curved line from danced towards sang or from sang towards danced. They are of equal rank. What about the man and his wife? We show this by our curved line to show the coordinate dependencies. But we are not done. What about the bilateral relations? Since we have a coordinate verb phrase, it is in a bilateral relation with the subject. Therefore, we draw our arrow from the head, which is the coordinate verb phrase, towards the subject, which is the man and his wife. So we have established a bilateral relation over here. Is there any other bilateral relation? Of course. Our prepositional phrase in the church, in, is in a bilateral relation with the church. So we draw an arrow from in towards the church, which is the dependent. We are left with the last bilateral relation. Read the sentence. The man and his wife sang and danced in the church. Now look at this verb phrase, sang and danced. And cannot occur without danced. Danced cannot occur without and in the sentence. For example, you can say, the man and his wife sang and in the church. No. Therefore, the presence of and here means that the danced should occur. And danced is also dependent on the and. Both must occur. There's a bilateral relation between danced, which is the verb, the head, and also and, which is the conjunction. So we draw our arrow from danced towards and. Let us take the second example. Using the arrows method, indicate the bilateral and unilateral relations in the following. So over here, we do not have conjoint elements. All that we are going to do is to indicate the bilateral and unilateral relations between the elements. Sentence 2. This is a noun phrase. The students outside the house. Let us first start by identifying the bilateral relations. Do we have a verb? We don't have a verb, which means we cannot have bilateral relations between the verb and the subject and the rest. But we have a prepositional phrase. There is a bilateral relation between the preposition and then the noun phrase. We will do this by drawing our arrow from the preposition towards the noun phrase. Make sure you use this symbol because it represents bilateral dependencies. Outside cannot occur without the house. The house cannot occur without outside. Bilateral dependency. That is the only bilateral dependency in the sentence. What about the unilateral dependencies? First of all, identify your noun phrases. We have the students and the house. Student is in a unilateral relation with the, and also house is in a unilateral relation with the, which is the dependent. We are left with the last dependency relation. That is the relation between the head and the dependent over here. Remember that outside the house is a prepositional phrase which is just giving us more information about the students. Students can occur without outside the house. This means that students is in a unilateral relation with outside the house. We draw our arrow from students towards outside the house. Now the third sentence, we have a verb. Therefore, we can establish a bilateral relation between the subject and the verb. That is the only bilateral relation in the sentence, the relation between the lady and spoke. Let us move on to look at the unilateral dependencies. The first unilateral dependency is seen in the noun phrase, which is the and lady. So lady is the head, the becomes the dependent. There is a unilateral relation between lady and the. There is also a unilateral relation between spoke, which is the verb, and then respectfully. Respectfully over here is just giving us information about how the action was taken. Spoke, which is the head of the clause, can occur without this. This means that it is in a unilateral relation with respectfully. Therefore, we draw our arrow from spoke towards respectfully to show this unilateral dependency. These are some questions for practice. Pause the video, write them down, and then solve them.